my thoughts today. It's definitely my what I'm thinking today as we're wrapping up a year. I mentioned it a bit on the radio yesterday, but I want to explore it more in this format. Is what I've come to learn about the power of daily learning versus courses. I just have to give you some background about myself. Although I was always able to pick up knowledge easily thanks to a gift of God, I was never, I wouldn't consider myself as the kind of guy that loved studying. I studied, I loved certain subjects, history, um, the humanities, from a Jewish perspective, but I wouldn't say that was like, obsessed with Torah study or with any study for that matter. Very much reflective, very much, meditating, intuitive, trying to listen to my own thoughts. And at some stage, I always knew that like I really want to get much more into learning, not only time wise, but from a headspace wise. And it was a very slow process. It was a very slow process for me to come there. And if you had told me, let's say 10 years ago, that one day I would be starting 4 daily podcasts every day, 365 days a year, and just take one after another. First of all, would have been mind blown that people are actually signing up. I actually thought 5 people would sign up for Tanya. I didn't think we would be close to 85, and that we haven't even started yet. But more than that, I would have said no way. Like, and when I tell my friends that I've committed to 4 courses a day, they think, like, Levi, how long is it going to take till you burn out? And truth is, I don't know. I mean, I've been doing one of the courses for 5 months, another one of the courses for 2 and 3 months, and another one of the course for 2 months. And now I've taken on the fourth course. Now it's not about me, but it's about the journey I've taken to explore and understand, at least for me, that the single most sustainable way to retain and to grow your knowledge is by taking drop by drop by drop consistently. In the past, with the shul we ran, we had massive courses, of various organizations that would run at the academy, who runs amazing courses with us, and others. And I was a big fan of courses, and I saw that as it's definitely a very cool and attractive method. But then I had to start asking myself, what is the single best way, not just to be cool and to attract numbers, but what's the single best way to get people to change the way they think? Because if you had to ask me as a Webster's dictionary, which I'm not, define what is education. That would be an interesting question. Is education the skill? Is it the know-how? I would define education that education is giving the individual the ability to make the best possible choices in as many areas of their life as possible. That's what I would call education. So yes, that's why maybe secular education is important, because it gives you opportunities when it comes to earning a living, but that's just one part. What about making choices morally? What about making choices about your Judaism? What about making choices on marriage? All that is all part of education. So I define education, at least currently, as giving people the ability to make the right choices in as many areas of life as possible. Now, again, I don't know what the right choice is for each person, but the more education they get, the more clarity they will have when it comes to those choices, and they'll hopefully make better choices. And better choices for them, better choices morally, better choices ethically. That's what we pray for. That's what education really is. And if that's my definition of education, and I believe that it's a interesting definition, you could agree or disagree, but it's worthy of exploring. If the definition of education is to give people the ability to make the best decisions in their life, then you have to ask yourself, how do I educate in that way? What's the best way to get people into that perspective? How do I educate for that? So yes, at times we need courses. Tonight, please God, we're going to run a course on Hanukkah. I hope you could join. If not, you can listen to the recording. But That is educational because it will give you information and hopefully will inspire you to celebrate Hanukkah maybe more meaningfully than you were intending to originally. However, if education is to give people the ability to make the best choices, then education has to be something that is consistent and something that is stimulating and something that's in small bites. Why do I say that? Because each day of life, we go out and wage new battles. And the course that you heard a year ago might help you a drop, but it will not be enough to give you the guidance for today. In order to get guidance for today, you have to learn something today. And each day's studies, whether they are connected to your topic of what you're going to be confronting that day or not, they will impact you. And I'll explain what I mean. Each day you plug into Torah study, each day that you plug into Torah, and you open a book and you start learning some Torah, you're plugging into godliness. So whether what you're plugging in is exactly what you're dealing with, for example, you're dealing with a marital issue, you're dealing with a nachas issue, you're dealing with a financial issue, whatever, not necessarily will you find it. Sometimes you might. Sometimes you say, wow, like that was exactly the shir I needed to hear today. But sometimes you won't. But you've plugged into God. And by plugging into God, you've gotten out of your own head. And the moment you've plugged into godliness and you're now in the outlet, you've connected to the outlet of God, the chances are that you will be making better decisions because you've gone out of your mind. And for me, this has been a transformative idea that I could have shared this with you 10, 20 years ago, but I wasn't there yet. Now I actually believe it. I've come to a stage that I believe that even if the Torah you learned that day isn't relevant, and I'm not advocating learning necessarily stuff that are irrelevant, but even if it is, you know, you go to a course and it happens to be the Chumash of the day just feels totally abstract, or the mitzvah of the day seems irrelevant, whatever course you're doing, the Tehillim you're saying, but you've plugged in. And once you've plugged into spirituality, and spirituality is infinite. In other words, once you grab a bit of it, you grabbed all of it. As it says, a statement of Kabbalah, etzem, the essence. When you touch essence, when you grab a bit of essence, you grab all of the essence. Because if it's essence, then there is no pieces. You know, this has pieces. So you could hold the cover, you're not necessarily touching the bottom. But essence is infinite. So it doesn't start, it doesn't end. It's everything. Wherever you are, that's where it is. So the moment you tap into essence, you're into the whole thing. You're in it. So the moment you plug into God, the moment you plug into God's wisdom, you are upgrading yourself. And at that moment, even if that wisdom was not necessarily the information you need for the struggle you have, you've allowed yourself to go and upgrade your mind from being mere mortal to touching divinity. And then you can, once, as I said, you touch divinity, you touch all of divinity. In other words, you have access to ultimate truth. When I was younger, and I shared this a few weeks ago, I was obsessed with only learning things that are relevant to me. I had this mishigas, it has to be relevant. It has to be relevant. So what's the point? What's the message? What's it trying to tell me? And eventually I realized some things are relevant in the moment. In other words, you could see the lesson right away. And something, the relevance is that it's upgrading your brain. And once your brain is upgraded, it's going to teach you how to think. And that's what I want to explore for the next few minutes. There's a very big difference between what to think and how to think. What to think is easy. It's how you raise your children, at least when they're a young age. Okay, this is what we do. This is the right thing to do. This is manners. This is menschlichkeit, etc. And often people will come to guidance, to a therapist and a rabbi, whatever. They'll come with, tell me what to think. How do I make sense of this? But a good therapist and a good rabbi and a good friend will allow you to figure things out yourself. But education is giving you the ability, Torah gives you the ability to learn how to think, which is very different of what to think. Because once you know how to think, then you'll be able to make, at least most of the time, decent decisions in your life. Because you know what factors to put in. You know what approach to come to it. For example, let me explain what it means how to think. How to think is you have an issue. So you think to yourself, is this big or is this small? No, what to think is when I tell you this is a big issue, this is a small issue. How to think is I approach it myself. Is it a big issue? Is it a small issue? Is it a moral issue? Is it an emotional issue? What do I want the outcome to be? What would make me happy? These are all things that are general principles of how to think. Am I here for myself? Am I here for God? Is it all about me? Is it about me at all? These are all complicated, complex questions. But the more you get engulfed in Hashem's wisdom, the more you embrace it, the more we learn how to think. Or at least how to approach the issue or who to approach about it. And that comes from any learning of Torah you do, whether it's relevant or not. Torah is God's wisdom. And when you tap into it, you're tapping into the way God thinks, or at least he allows us to understand somewhat of how he thinks. And once you start thinking that way, it will apply into numerous areas of your life. For me, one of the hardest things to see as a rabbi is how many people don't know how to think. They don't know how to make decisions. Not what decision to make, but how to even approach the question. For example, what to think is, this girl is the right one for you, marry her. That's what to think. Just love her. How to think is, okay, how do you approach a shidduch? What should you be looking for? Now, I'm not telling you what values, because that's what to think. I'm telling you, you should be looking for values. You should be looking for chemistry. You should be looking for, as much similar in worldview as possible. That is a how. What your worldview is and his and hers, that you'll figure out. That's your journey. That no one should tell you. That is dictatorship. But how to think? How to date? Should you move in together before you marry? Again, that's what to do. I'm telling you the principle. The principle is how to think of marriage. That marriage is seeing it in a certain way. Based on that, if you decide to move in together before, mazel tov. You decide not to, even better. But Torah is literally God taking you into his worldview and allowing to see the world through his prism, through his eyes. And obviously not his infinite level, because we're human beings. There's a limit how much we could understand, but as much as humanly possible, and the more we delve into it, we're able to see it. But the problem is, if you don't do it on a consistent basis, if you're not doing it daily, you will lose touch. If you don't eat daily, if you don't exercise somewhat daily, if you don't sleep daily, the body needs maintenance. Our clarity needs maintenance. Marriage, if you don't invest in it daily, it slips. Doesn't mean it's going to end in divorce tomorrow, but a marriage that's not invested is a day that we're a little more distant from one another. Torah cannot just survive. Our clarity cannot just survive on a nice course, on an unbelievable rabbi. This rabbi or Rebbitzin, she or he runs a course. It's mind-blowing. And it could be mind-blowing. Absolutely. But I can only talk from my experience. And I'm sure people will disagree with what I'm saying. And that's what makes this, that's why I love shiurim, because I love disagreements. I do not find within myself that courses change me long term. I cannot pinpoint one area in my life that's ever been transformed by a course. Again, it's my unique experience. And maybe you're different. I've had changes after courses, but nothing permanent. What changes me? When something clicks. And it never clicks in a moment. It's a slow process of absorbing information, of thinking things over day by day, experiencing things. And one day, on the most uninspirational day of your life, it clicks. And at that moment, you change. When I ask myself, when did I go from a guy that tolerated learning to a person who loves learning? When was that change? There was no big moment. No. I mean, novels and books and movies try to make believe as if there's big moments. But again, I can only talk for my own life. Yes, you go through traumas in life that change you, but the change that comes from within is drop by drop by drop. Just like Rabbi Akiva, who saw the drop of water dripping, dripping, dripping on the rock for many days, and eventually it made a hole. You know, there's two kinds of rains. There's the kind of rain that's like a nice high felt storm that just comes and blasts everything. And then there's the rain that's much softer, but it goes and goes and goes. And it's the second rain that gets into the kishkis, takes much longer to dry. It's seeped in, drip by drip by drip. And that's why Judaism is so daily. It's such a daily religion. It doesn't just say have powerful experiences once, twice, 10, 15, 20 times a year. It doesn't. It says show up every day, daven every day, learn every day, do a mitzvah every day, make a bracha on every piece of food you eat. Go to mikveh every month, keep Shabbat every week, etc., etc., etc. And you're like, 1 second, but that's so not what religion's about. Religion is about experiences. And experiences, as we've said a few weeks ago, constant pleasure is not pleasure. So if something is constant, it's not pleasurable. The definition of pleasure is it's here in a moment and it's not here later, because if it's here constantly, it's not pleasure, it's just your new standard of living. So for example, for me, the first time I sat on this beautiful leather chair, it was pleasure. At this stage, I don't feel it's leather. If I always felt it's leather, then I'm focusing on the chair, not on my work. It's a good day when I'm not even aware that I'm sitting on the chair and my back isn't sore and I'm just doing my work. Or I sit in a new car. Yes, the first month I'm aware, and eventually it's no longer, that pleasure is not constant. The greatest pleasure in the world is not constant. It might be a little bit after that, but it will never be at the same level. So then religion is supposed to be all about pleasure and experiences and connecting with the divine and, deep mystical experiences. I was reading a rabbi, a bit of a left-wing Orthodox rabbi, where his favorite pastime is just criticizing religion, religious thinkers and religious rabbis, guys that like totally lost the plot, and religion is all about experiences. And I hear his point, but I think it's also misguided. Yes, religion has issues, not the religion itself, but people that are religious don't necessarily figure everything out, and there's major issues within the community. But the answer is not to take away the daily, but it's rather to infuse the monotony of life, the dailiness of it, with a little more meaning. But it's only through daily connection that it's sustained. Marriage does not survive on a once-a-year trip to the Pacific Islands. It doesn't. I don't care. You could have the nicest hotel on the top floor of Mauritius. You cannot survive a marriage by just spending 1 week together. It's daily. It's petty, but it's daily. And it's not petty because that's what's building. So a beautiful structure, which is a marriage, a good marriage is a beautiful structure out of which generations come, is nurtured by tiny little things daily. And it's the same thing with educating our minds. This idea of going to a course that will change you, I think it's run its course. I've heard 5,000 different courses in my life. and each one with their own level of wisdom. Like someone said, Rabbi, lady, when are you going to put your course together? And I'm sure I can put together a few ideas that we've discussed over the years and develop a course. But everything upon, and I'm not saying I never will, I don't want to be held against me. But at my current thinking, I'm just thinking to myself, like, why would I? It's motivational. It's a nice way to make money. It's impactful. You might even get people to cry. But if your goal is to transform, then build relationships and share daily, connect as much as you can, and slowly but surely, we infiltrate, we impact, we transform. You want to change your child? Rarely will one conversation change your child. Start emulating the behavior you want from them, and slowly, slowly, over years and maybe even decades, they'll start emulating you as well. And your spouse maybe as well. The quick way of fixing things rarely works. The dynamic, transformative way rarely works. Someone will say, I went to a therapist. It was the best therapist. I paid 4,000 rand for an hour, and nothing changed. Obviously, it was one session. I went 6 sessions. Okay, so maybe a drop changed, but that's not enough. Give it time, slowly. An hour, then allow it a week to process, and then another hour. But the point is, processing and daily connection and thought, and slowly but surely transformation happens. We have to let go of the myth of dramatic change, of dramatic transformation, that the human being suddenly just has this moment of epiphany, like, a religious founder on top of a mountain where they suddenly just get it. I love when I read these introduction to books. One day it just hit me. There's the 5 love languages. One day it just hit me. There's the 7 habits. One day just, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's great. A lot of these ideas are fantastic. But that's not how life works. Yes, there's certain moments of epiphanies. But true transformation doesn't even come from epiphanies. It comes from day by day, searching and grappling and living in the darkness and getting a little clarity here and a little clarity there. And one day you look back and you say, wow, I'm a different person. And this is the time of the year. You can ask yourself, after 2020, what has transformed me this year? Was it the big event? Was it COVID? Was it a major course I went to? Again, those might be memorable. What, if anything, changed within you? What changed and how did it change? And I'll bet that on a majority, again, it's very hard for me to say always because, few things in life are absolute, but on a majority, the change that you found in your life this year came slowly, but surely, consistently. And one day you just woke up and you realized, wow, I don't recognize myself anymore. And that's why I developed such a passion for these daily courses. Chumash, Tanya, Daily Vort, Mitzvah. The reason I developed such a passion for it is because it's changing me. It's changing the listeners. It's suddenly you're living every day with Hashem's Torah, and slowly but surely the feedback I'm getting is people are plugged in. They feel more plugged in than any other course that maybe I invested 20 times more time in. That might be mind-blowing and I'll get great feedback that night, but transformation happens here. Subconsciously, you're learning about Avram and Sarah and Yitzchak and Rivka, and you're learning about the various commandments about agriculture in the Holy Land, and you're learning a nice Hasidic story, or you're learning a drop of mysticism, or you're learning a drop of davening. And slowly, you wake up one day and you realize, I see the world differently. Because again, I didn't learn techniques, which are important, but that's not what I learned. I learned how Hashem sees this world. from multiple perspectives, from multiple teachers. And then I woke up and I see the world differently. And that's why my encouragement to each and every one of us is, regardless of our plans over holiday, yes, chill out, take it easy, but do not exit your mind. Maybe learn other stuff, but don't exit your mind. That's what happens to many of us. We just become doof. We become an absolute dunce, or whatever language you want to say it, for 5 weeks. Just staring at Netflix or staring at the beach, and it's all cute, it's all wonderful, and there's room for it. But you can't exit your mind. The mind needs to be nurtured. Otherwise, whatever decisions we're making over those 5 weeks are coming straight out of Netflix or coming out of whatever else is nourishing our soul. You know that expression, you are what you eat? There's a much better expression. You live what you think. In other words, your thoughts define the character of person you are. So what will you think? If all day all you're thinking about is blue water, or do the two of them come together in the end of the series? No, they had so much potential, those two characters. Why? Then our thoughts, whatever will infiltrate, whatever will come out of our mind throughout the day, will be based on those thoughts. One of my big arguments I have with a lot of my colleagues all the time is that we need to sleep more. And I know I took a job that doesn't allow me to do it, but I'm a big believer in getting at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. It's anywhere between 7 and 8. Not a believer, I know it to be true. And my argument always to them is, even if you're going to do all your shiurim the next day with less sleep, and you'll accomplish all the shiurim, they'll all be lesser quality, because they're not coming from a place of health and awakeness. They're coming from a place of tiredness. And therefore, like yesterday, I recorded something in the beginning of the day, and I had a very short night's sleep the night before. And I just saw myself I wasn't proud of it. And then I had to take a nap because I literally wasn't coping. So I just lay down for a bit. And I woke up, and then the moment after I got up, a few minutes later, I ate something, I went back to recording something, and I just felt like suddenly it's making sense. Like there's coherence in it. And if that's about tiredness and how hungry you are, I always say the two biggest solutions to having peace at home is both need to sleep and both need to eat. The rest is commentary. That solves 90% of the marriage. If sleeping and eating affects how you think, how much more so whatever thoughts you have in your mind. So if all you've read today is a nice romance novel, and you've listened to some political radio and some love songs on radio, and that is what's in your mind right now, what are the chances that the decisions you make the rest of the day will come from a place of absolute clarity? Chances are, if you're a decent, good person and you have morals, they won't be the worst decisions, but will they be the highest level they can be? No. Will you be proud of many decisions? Maybe not. But the more you feed your mind with healthy thoughts, the more you feed your mind with godly thoughts, the decisions you make following that will feel more in tune with who you are because you plugged in. And that's why we do religion daily, not because God's a tyrant, not because, I'm just going to get into your kishkis every single day. No. But because every day you need to live. And the only way to live is to be plugged in. As I said earlier, I believe that all education is about is giving people the ability to make good choices. Every moment of the day, you're making a choice. The choice could be right now if you're staying on the shear or not, to check your phone during the shear, whatever, but you're making a million choices a second. The amount of input we need into our lives daily, especially with the complex lives we live, the amount of input we need daily to make sure that our decisions come from a good place is incredible. And therefore, it is so necessary to plug in as much as we can. Get into the car, listen to a vart. Get back into the car, listen to another vart. You're taking a walk, listen to something, or learn something, or read something, or watch something, or think something. But plug in constantly. Make a bracha on the cup over, and every every time you're sitting down, another bracha. Why? Because life is about plugging in. Because by default, if you don't plug in, you're plugged out. It's almost as if you don't plug into the outlet, very often you snap out of the outlet. You're not plugged in. And that's why Judaism specifically is so obsessed with every area of your life, because what it's trying to do is to make you mindful at every moment. Plug in constantly. You're putting on your shoes, plug in how to put on your shoes according to halacha. You're going to sleep, plug in. Say the Shema. Sleep on your left side, whatever. Wake up, say Modani. Eating down lunch, make a bracha. Make a bracha on each kind of food. Make a birkat hamazon after. Share some interesting thought during the meal, etc., etc., etc. Not because Hashem's trying to take over our life, but because He knows us. And He knows that by default, we will fall back into our lower self, into our animalistic self at any moment that we're not plugged above. There's a famous story of one of the great early Hasidic sages. His name was Rabbi Meir of Premishlan. And the story goes that one time, a bunch of Jews wanted to go to the mikveh, but the only way to access the mikveh was to go over a big ice patch that was extremely slippery. Everyone was breaking bones, and it wasn't working. And Rabbi Meir says, I'm going, and he walks across. And he goes to the mikveh and comes back. And someone says, Rabbi Meir, is that a miracle? He says, no. He says, when you're plugged in above, you don't fall below. If you're connected above, you don't fall. In other words, obviously it was a spiritual idea, but his point was, I'm not just a human being walking on ice. I'm plugged into God, and that gives me stability. Every moment you're plugged in, you can navigate the ice, the slippery slopes of our lives so much better. Every moment we're plugged in, we have such opportunity to gain wisdom. And that's my final message for the year. The final message is, we've had a very interesting year on Zoom. And I please God, I pray, Carrie, I pray that next year it's face-to-face. This isn't enough, 100%. It's, first of all, half the time, and it's not face-to-face. It has all the weaknesses. However, what I've learned this year is that, yes, it's amazing that we have every week beautiful, meaningful conversations. And it's important, but only if it works together with daily sound bites, daily videos, daily meditation, daily conversations that maybe won't be as entertaining or interesting as a course or shiur. Just like, you can have a great Shabbos meal, but you can't live off a Shabbos meal the whole week. The rest of the week, the food might not be as glamorous. You might just get pup and gravy and, a little hot dog, sausage, but you need it. You need to stay up. You can't just say, oh, you know what, Shabbos is coming, honey? Ooh, that's going to be a meal. Starve yourself silly for the whole week. It doesn't work like that. Shabbos is nice. And if you only eat dull food 7 days a week, it might get a bit much. So it's important to have Shabbos, but it's more important to have the 6 days of the week. So please God, to another year of insight, but more importantly, a year of plugging in, a year of growth. And I encourage you, if you have not joined any of the shiurim and there are topics that might interest you, to listen, to join. And if you have joined, but you're not necessarily catching up, try to catch up. It doesn't have to be mine. It could be a different teacher, but try to plug in every day at least once, and more than once. Simply because life is so complicated, we cannot afford to make our decisions from any other place than from the best place within us.